is Candice Dickens, dope black therapist, and I am here with the amazing sex therapist, Aydrelle Collins, who is also a licensed clinical professional counselor. And this woman is a unicorn. That's what I called her when I met her. I was like, "You are a unicorn, girl. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come take your flowers. How are you?" And wait a minute.
Oh,
And we are both showing our brand. So can you stand up again so I
mhm.
can see what your brand says again?
Yes. It's
Hello, dope ass sex therapist. I love it. So if you didn't know, this is who she is. So let's begin by telling us some things about you. Tell us about where you're at, what you specialize in, so people can know how to reach you. Let's get all that front load before we get into it.
yes, of course. So yeah, I am Aydrelle Collins. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Dallas, Texas. I am here and lead therapist at Melanin Sex Therapy. I specialize in sex therapy. I am an ASEC trained therapist. I'm a somatic sex educator. I'm a body worker. I am a sex coach. So I specialize in all things sexuality, um, all things human sexuality. And what makes my practice I stand out is like I specifically center Black and brown sexuality. So anything Black and
Mhm.
brown sexuality, like that's what I do. So
Oh, I
I've been in
love it.
private practice for about like 3 years now. Melanin has been my heart goal. It's been my dream to open up a practice that was by a Black woman for Black people because I didn't feel like there was enough like representation for our specific needs. So that's what I do.
Mhm. I love it. I love it, which makes you a unicorn because I think you're the second sex therapist, Black sex therapist, BIPOC sex therapist I've ever met.
Hmm.
And usually you don't find us.
Yeah.
So you really are a unicorn, which I wanted us everyone to meet you because you are
Yeah.
just amazingly exceptional in what you do. But also, it is good for people to know about sex therapy. And also, this is a really important topic about, I call it body trauma, somatic trauma of
Yeah.
sexual dysfunction.
Hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit? About why that's a
Yes.
trauma when you have either physical issues that stop you from being sexually active or physical problems that cause you not to be a sexual person because that's part of our identity. Talk
Yeah.
about the trauma of that experience.
Hmm. Yeah. I think because sex is such a literal thing that we do, I think like it becomes a trauma. You feel like your body is betraying you, or you can't do it with an actual physical condition, or there's something mental that's holding you back.
Mhm.
You've been fed all of these narratives on sex that make sex enjoyable. All of that can create traumatic experiences and like for you not enjoy sex further, cause you to hold things in your body, further make you feel like you are lacking something, you are less than, you're less of a person, you're less of a man, you're less of a woman. um, and so that can lead to other depression, anxiety.
Mhm.
I think that people like to treat sex like it's this vacuum and like it exists over here by itself and doesn't have any impact on other parts of our lives. But like I know that it's not true, and I think like the average person can tell it's not true either. Like if you are wanting to be sexual and you're not able to be sexual, like that can cause other issues and like cause other mental health issues in your life as well. And so I think like if you're not having good sex and if you want to have good sex and you're not able to have it, that can really impact your quality of life. And so to me, that is a traumatic thing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it's traumatic. I think that one of the things you said is that it impacts you emotionally.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can you talk a bit more about that? How it impacts you? Because what I know about people with sexual, it's one of our first identities.
yeah, yeah.
It's that thing that even babies are sexual beings. Can you
Hmm.
talk more about
Yeah, like that emotional impact. Like I said, it's like feeling like you're lacking or less than or like you're broken. And in society, we don't see positive, clear messages messages about sex. We don't talk about sex. We live in a very oversexed society. One talks about it. So when you see like all these images on TV, or like you hear your friends talking about like the type of sex they're having, and you're not having that type of sex, like make you feel like really like shitty. Excuse me, I cuss too much.
That's okay. We can curse on this show. It's okay. We grown ups.
Yeah, that's a grown. Yeah, it can make you feel like I said, less than, like there's something wrong with you, that you're broken, or that you're not normal. But the reality is, like when it comes to sexuality, there is no normal. And I think that's where that emotional trauma, that emotional impact comes from, is because people are suffering, and then like sexual issues can be very loading, because you don't want to feel you are going to be humiliated. You don't want to feel like you're going to be judged. And so like a lot of people just don't know where to go to like talk about sexual issues and be honest about it. So they walk around, they're carrying that guilt, that shame. And like I said, that's a very lonely and isolating space to be in.
Absolutely. It makes me think of this. There's this show called Insecure. Do you watch Insecure?
Love Insecure.
You know that episode when she was like, "My vagina's broken. I got
Yes.
broken vagina," and she went through that whole show,
Yes.
being wounded, thinking that nobody wanted her because there was something wrong with her, and became something like a deficit. And this was really an amazing, remarkable woman who's very successful in her own right.
Yeah.
Her vagina was broken, so it means she was
Yeah.
broken.
Yes. And like I see that especially with my women clients, is that yeah, if there is something wrong with your vagina, if you have vaginismus, or like sex is just painful, or you don't have like a high sex drive, or like whatever, like your vagina is almost like your identity. And like as a woman, like it's almost like society puts all of our value on whether or not we can be sexual for men. And it's not almost like it does, are set up to be sexual gates. And like that's a very big burden that none of us ask for, but we are given that burden. And like I think that is an unfair burden. But like you are absolutely right. When my female clients come in here, like that is like the number one thing. Like I have to get better for my partner. I have to get better for someone else, myself.
What about on the other side, the male experience, right? And doesn't matter. And the part of the thing is you can be a same-sex partner and a heterosexual partner, and the pressure is still the same. I want to be able to please this person. And the disappointment, the shame is devastating for a female partner. But what about the gender role with male? Because men are defined by sexuality, by prowess, right? What is that like for them? To have this body betrayal?
Yeah. It's equally as hard for them as well, because like you said, our society, like men are supposed to always be, men are supposed to be able to control when they can get an erection, like they should be like turned on all the time. And when someone is suffering from erectile dysfunction or delayed ejaculation or premature ejaculation, like that really takes a hit to like their ego, and like they feel like they cannot be sexual, they are less than, and it's a lot of shame and guilt, and like society puts that on them as well unfairly. Like men are solely responsible for like the sex in the relationship, and like sex can't happen without a penis, and that's not necessarily true. And I think like there's like added pressure from the outside, and then there's like the pressure that we put on ourselves, that I have to make this in, I have to do this. And like the thing with like any type of like sexual dysfunction, the more you think about it, the more you worry about it, like the worse it's going to get. And like it's like this snowball effect. And so part of my role as a sex therapist is getting people to get out of those loops in their heads, and kind of create new pathways and new narratives around their bodies and their sexuality, and what they consider sex, what they consider pleasurable and things like that.
How do you do that, dope therapist? How do you do that, dope sex therapist?
So, yes. I mean, it just depends on the person. Different techniques. Like I love like a lot of mindfulness. I love a lot of body work. I think like somatic experiencing and like somatic sex education, I think that is like the best thing that I use so far because I think that it gets like the best results. A lot of people aren't in tune with their bodies, so like they don't know what their pelvis feels like. They don't know what it feels like to be sitting in a chair, and they don't realize that they hold a lot of tension like in their pelvic yet. And so when we start doing somatic work or like any type of body work, that teaches them to be more in tune with their body. So I think like that's the biggest battle is like teaching people how to be in tune with their body.
Well, absolutely, because the message you've been getting all your life is don't touch yourself,
Yes,
right? Don't
yes,
go down there, don't touch, right? So it's like a
yeah,
double message. Don't go down there, stop touching yourself.
yeah,
And then they meet someone like you and you're like, oh, go touch yourself. And
yes,
that's because a lot of us is don't masturbate, don't. There's
yes.
that double message, especially if there's a religious component behind it.
Oh yes, definitely, for sure, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And like I can't tell you like how many people that I've worked with that have men and women that have just like never like seen themselves, like never have seen their
Mm.
vagina, never have really taken the time to like look at their penis. And like when they masturbate, like we learn how to masturbate like really quick, like so we don't get caught because like young when we start to masturbate, and like you said,
Mhm.
it's very shameful, it's very frowned upon. So that carries with us into adulthood. And so
Mhm.
that really does impact like how you self sexually, how you view yourself, like your body parts, and that does have an impact on like how you show up sexually
Oh,
with other
wow.
people.
So that shame from childhood shows up as shame when you can't perform. So it's
Yes.
shame here, reward
Hmm.
here about being a sexual person, but then there's shame here when you
Yeah.
can't be sexual anymore.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 And I think that, you know, if you've never had like the message of like how you show up sexually, and like that's okay, and like what sex can look however you want. Like sex doesn't have to go on like this linear path of like foreplay, penetration, orgasm, and done. Like sex, I tell my clients all the time, like sex looks how the hell you and your partner decide you want it to look. And I think that that is something so freeing about that, because I can see like the light bulbs come on when I tell people that. And it's almost like they are granted permission to like, I don't have to have penetrative sex if I don't want to. We can just do this, and we can
Yeah.
like, yeah, like whatever you want to do, like whatever you call
Mhm.
sex, it's sex.
Yeah. What do you do? Because I know we had a conversation when we first met, and you were like sexual service consent. I was like, what's that? Because for some people, they'll say, no, I want penetration. And the
Mhm.
partner has no libido because either they have diabetes or they've had cancer treatments. Something's happened, or something's happened in the body, or there's a
Yeah,
trauma that's happened and the body can't respond. So I hope you can talk a little bit about that.
yeah,
And they'll say, I don't want to do the toys,
mhm,
because it's
yeah,
bringing up some stuff. Well, it brings up disappointment and shame, right?
yeah.
Is that when you bring in a sexual surrogate, or what do you do with those kind of people who say, I want the penetration, but my partner doesn't show up for whatever reason, medical or psychological, they just can't show up?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it depends on the person. When I refer out to a sexual surrogate, I think that
And
because
what is that? Is that different from a prostitute? It was
yeah, it is different from a prostitute. Prostitution is illegal, so I can't refer people to prostitute.
sex workers. I'm sorry. I'm just outdated. They're called sex workers, not prostitutes.
Of course, of course. Yes, love my sex workers. But no, there is like a more like therapeutic process when it comes. So like the term for it now is like intimate partner surrogate. So they don't
Mm.
go by sexual surrogates anymore. And so what they do is they basically like teach people how to have sex and be pleasurable. I am starting a class called Sex and Color, and like my first guest is actually um, a surrogate partner. So I'm excited to talk to her about it more. But there's a screening process that people have to go through, just like a therapist, just like a body worker, to see if there's even they're even a good candidate for that. So in your instance, if somebody were to come to me and was like, my partner is just not sexual for whatever, and like I don't want to use toys, I don't want to use whatever, we would kind of like unpack that shame, unpack, what it is surrounding toys, what it is surrounding, what other ways can you be sexual. We would maybe look at if they would be willing to open up the relationship, if that's a possibility, and what does that look like to be in an open relationship. So like there's other avenues that we could try, and if like they still are just like hell bent on like, I want like a sex surrogate, then I have people I can refer them to, and then from there, like the surrogate would determine if they were like an appropriate person for surrogacy or not.
Wow, that's amazing. And what I do like, there's another solution. One of
Mhm.
the things I want us to touch a little bit on is that anger that sometimes, like the person who has the difficulty because either something medical's happened, and it really is a body betrayal because you can't get the body to do what you want at will.
Yeah,
The anger and the resentment that sometimes that happens with the partner who is still able to function. Can you
yeah,
talk about that and how you deal with that? Because that's real,
yeah.
because there's resentment that's there.
Of course, of course. And I think that that's one of those instances where I'm saying like sex doesn't exist in a vacuum, because like the issue there is not just the sex, it's the anger and the resentment. So we have to get the anger and the resentment under control, and like looking for other avenues and other solutions to where both people can be satisfied. And like I'm always curious of like how people are talking to one another about sex,
Mhm.
because people don't really have these conversations effectively. Like there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of anger around it. So this diffusing the situation, tackling the resentment, and then once we tackle the anger and the resentment, then we can start to talk about sex in a more productive, healthy way. And then together, like the three of us, the couple and myself, we can come up with some type of solution that may be feasible for everyone. And like sometimes there is no feasible solution. I've had couples separate because, the sex was not.
Real talk.
Yeah, and like that's the reality of the situation. So I think it's just looking at all angles, but first
Mhm.
getting those underlying issues resolved first, and then we can have a more productive conversation around like the sexuality aspect of it. A lot of this is also acceptance too, right? So
Mhm.
like you have to accept that like this is where your partner is. This is what your partner is capable of doing. So they've shown you like this is what they have. They're not capable of giving you the type of sex that you need or you want. So, like, what are you willing to do with that? And, like, for you as a couple, what are you wanting and willing to do with that information?
That's powerful. Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that the couples who can get past this are couples who have more emotional intimacy, or do you find that the couples who have sexual dysfunction also have emotional disintimacy or non-intimacy? I think I just
Yeah,
made that word up, disintimacy.
we'll go with
Urban. You feel like they're also
it.
having emotional connection issues as well?
Yeah, yeah, because I think that is a big part of it, because it's almost like I'm over here, you're over here. I'm not getting what I want, so I'm gonna stay over here. I'm not getting, you're like coming at me like all types of crazy ways, so I'm going to stay over here. And that does drive a wedge between couples. That does create a disconnection. And like you need emotional safety in
Mhm.
order to be intimate. And like you need trust in order to be intimate with your partner. And if
That's
you've had those type of issues in the past, and I'm not talking about like infidelity, something as simple as I try to have sex with you, but like you complain about the type of sex, or you complain that we're not
mm,
having enough sex, or the dishes aren't done, or like we're just always like going back and forth with one another. Like there's no trust there, there's no safety there. And so how are
mhm.
you going to have sex with someone that you don't trust and that you don't feel emotionally safe with, right? So you have sex, but it may not be necessarily good sex. And like, who wants to have bad sex over and over again? So that's a big piece of this. So the couples who are able to get past their sexual issues do develop more like emotional safety, do develop more emotional intimacy with one another. And like that makes their sex life like wonderful, like greater. And like they may not even be having sex like but once a week, but like it's good quality, like mind-blowing intimate sex. And like for them, that's enough. Versus like couples who have like a ton of sex, but it's not necessarily good. And like outside of sex, like the relationship is not that great because there's no like emotional safety or there's no trust there. So to answer your question, yes and yes.
Wow. What do you say to couples? Because I know some couples who have great sex. They've had great sex since they met at the movie theater, at the club. They've been having great sex, right?
Yeah.
But there's no emotional intimacy. And they'll say,
Mm.
we just connect there.
Yeah.
But when we're in the room, we're like living this parallel lives where there's this connection where you're working a lot, you're doing this, maybe the kids are there, but there's no emotional intimacy, right? So the body's able to perform. There's no body trauma there, but there's a level of disconnect and abandonment. What do you say to those couples? Because that's a very lonely experience.
It is a really lonely experience, and it's teaching them that like the emotional connection is just as important as the physical connection, and going over like ways that they can connect. And like it's about intentionality. So I know like the longer we are with our partners, and like life gets in the way, like we stop being intentional with one another, and like that happens. We're human. And so how can you start to be intentional again with your partner? What does emotional connection look like? What do you want it to look like? Where can you find time to start to reprioritize your relationship? So I am all about asking my clients, like, okay, what it is that emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, like you're here now, but what do you want it to look like? And like, it's okay if they don't know, but just like, what does that feeling look like? What would it feel like to be like emotionally close to your partner again? And then we can start to go from there to kind of create some steps on getting the emotional connection back.
Yeah, that's powerful. Because I think for a lot of us, something you said about sexual history, we don't have a model for emotional intimacy. We may
First.
have a sexual model, but we don't have an emotional model,
Yeah.
right? And we don't know how to be intimate or close, or there's been a disruption with an argument. We don't know how to get back to that, right? We do that shut down thing. We don't know how to get back to being connected. Have you
Yeah.
found that a lot of people don't know how to stay connected emotionally, especially if there's a disagreement or a disappointment?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. And like there's no repair attempts. And I feel like with the couples that I've worked with, it's a lot of learning that you can still be mad at your partner. You can still be in a heated argument, but like that doesn't mean you don't love them. That doesn't mean that you don't want to be close to them. That doesn't mean that, you have to deprive each other of like connection, whether that's emotional connection or physical connection, if like there's consent and if both of you agree with that. But I find that, when we get angry and we get mad, we go off and we do our own thing, and like we may not talk to our partners for days, and like some people get in the habit of like punishing their partners, and like that's not productive. And like, you have this big blow up and you sweep it under the rug and you don't come back and discuss like the underlying emotions. So you find yourself again in this cycle of having these same blow ups over and over again. And like that starts to erode the relationship. And again, it's that cycle.
It's that cycle. So this is and it's so funny. I just spoke about the polyvagal nerve and the connection to drama. So it's part of that cycle where we stay activated and we do
Yeah.
the things we learn how to do when we're activated. We shut down, we fight, or we avoid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, again, like my role as their therapist is to teach them how to get out of that cycle. Because like I said, that erodes the trust and that erodes the emotional connection. And I think, it's very uncomfortable to talk about difficult emotions, especially like if you've never been taught to talk about difficult emotions, if you've never been taught allow other people to have their own emotions. It can be very hard to do that. It can feel very uncomfortable. I feel like it's necessary. So yeah, I do. I find that a lot with my clients as well, especially my Black clients, because I don't know about you. Like I wasn't taught of like how to talk about like emotions and things like that. And I see that a lot with my clients. So it's a lot of teaching them like how to be more in tune with their emotions, how to talk about their emotions, how to productively say, I didn't like what you there, like it made me feel XYZ, and this is what I need, and like how to make those repair attempts with their partners in order to start to move forward and get out of that cycle.
Yeah, it's that fear of vulnerability,
Yeah.
right? And I see that with a lot of BIPOC clients, but I see that with a lot of clients that there's that fear of if I own the mistake, then I'm the mistake, and I get to be I'm
Yeah.
the bad person, or if I'm vulnerable, then they're going to hurt me or use this against me,
Yeah.
right? So we learn how to cut off or just be guarded.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like a lot of people are, we didn't, our voice wasn't always valued. Like children are seen but not heard,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
same lesson about sex, don't touch yourself, don't do this,
Yeah.
becomes the same experience
hmm
as
Yeah.
an adult
Yeah.
that we don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really love doing inner child work with people, and like getting people to like listen to their little kids, and because I think that that's what comes out in these moments is like the little kid comes out, or like the protector comes out,
Mm,
and like how do you comfort your little kid as an adult, the way you were
mm,
comforted as a child, and like when your protector starts to come out, like sometimes your protector doesn't need to come out all the time. Sometimes
yeah,
like when your protector comes out, like it makes stuff like way worse. So like how do you learn to like say like thank you for being my shin, but I don't need you right now, so I need you to like go off somewhere. And so like
I
that's
got a little
really
IFS in you. When that
yes.
protector shows up, right? And asking yourself, what are you protecting? Because
Yeah.
sometimes we're protecting ego, especially if we
Yeah.
can't function because of the body trauma, or
hmm
protection vulnerability, or
Yeah.
I'm feeling disappointed. I'm looking at whose fault is it? Who's making me have this pain? And then we're at war.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you help clients get through that so they're
Mhm.
more vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. And like sex is vulnerable. Sex, I think, is like as vulnerable as like you can be with someone, and you need to be able to experience that vulnerability and to have that vulnerability if like you want good sex. And so that is a big part of my role, is teaching people how to be comfortable in their
Mm,
vulnerability, and also for their partners to like hold space when their partner is being vulnerable, because that's another part of it too. Like
yeah.
they may have in the past have been vulnerable, and like no one has ever held space. So like you were saying, like, they learn
Mm,
like vulnerability is this scary thing, and so they don't do it.
yeah. Yeah. So they avoid it, right? Because in
Yes.
order to be intimate, there has to be a certain level of vulnerability
hmm hmm
without
Yeah.
judgment.
Without judgment. Yes.
Without judgment. And that's huge for a lot of people. It's a scary place because
Yes.
sometimes they've gotten, now the fact you made that childhood connection, sometimes in their childhood, being vulnerable wasn't always safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
especially, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. Girl, I'm excited. This is a good conversation.
No. Like, yeah. When it comes to sex too, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The question is like, am I normal? Like, if is what I'm normal, or like what does that say about me? Like if I'm into like a certain type of sex thing, and like somebody else may not be into a certain type of sex thing. So like am I gonna share that, or I'm gonna sit here and endure sex that I really don't find pleasurable, because like it's scary for me to be vulnerable and to open up and say like,
Mm,
hey, this is what I like and this is what I don't like. So
mm,
that's another reason why like teaching people how to be vulnerable is important when it comes to
it's
sex
huge.
therapy.
That's
Yeah.
huge. I'm an imago therapist, and I know that one of the things we'll say to people, and that's a certain type of couples therapist, a specialization. And one of the things we'll say to people is, can you give yourself permission to visit them like they're unknown land with no judgment, and
Yeah.
visit them and just understand from a non-judgment place of what
hmm
it's like to be them and what they're interested in, what pleases them,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
that's huge because sometimes we come from a place of, judgment and looking
Yeah,
downward.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, and like once like people sense or pick up that judgment, like it's a shutdown. It's like I'm not gonna
mm,
talk to you about this again. I'm not gonna bring it up. Like forget I said anything. Um, we could just go back to either not having sex or like whatever type of sex you want, and I'm not enjoying it, and it's not pleasurable for me. And so yeah, like just teaching people how not to stand in judgment
I love
around
that.
what other people like.
I love that because shame creates a judgment, right? Once I shame you, bad person, then I
Yeah,
can blame you, I can punish you, and I can make you feel like, which doesn't feel good. So,
yeah.
what are some tips that you can give to people to help them be vulnerable? What are some advice you can give to people other than coming to you because we're going to give out your information again? But what are some things that you think are really important for people to take away from today in terms of the vulnerability, the shame piece, the intimacy piece? What are some things that you would advise or some tips or suggestions you would make?
Yeah, I think my biggest just like listening to your body and like I like what you said about when people's protectors come out. Like what are you protecting yourself against? And so really getting curious with yourself. I think that
Mm,
helps open up like a level of me, and it also helps to kind of dissect those shame pieces that come along with sex. Really being present with yourself, holding space for yourself, and like challenging those narratives, challenging the shame narratives that you have received in your life. Whose voice is it, right? So, like, is it your voice? Is it your parents' voice? Is it,
mhm.
society's voice? Really challenging and getting curious. And, being kind to yourself. And, like, I know that's like basic, like Barney, Mr. Rogers bullshit, but I think
But that works. Being kind to yourself because you can't be
yeah, and
kind to someone else if you're not kind to you.
exactly. And especially if you are going down a shame spiral, because like you said, like shame is like you are feeling like you are a bad person. Like whose voice is that? Who is saying that you are a bad person because this is what you like or this is what you've done or whatever. So just really teaching yourself how to push back and challenge those narratives when you start to go down those shame spirals. And curiosity. Curiosity is like I tell people should be your best friend,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to sex.
Yeah, to explore. And I love that, right? Because there's curiosity, there's no judgment. If I'm going
Yeah,
to the moon, I'm curious. I'm not thinking, why are these Martians doing this? I'm
yeah,
curious and I'm open. And I think
yeah,
that's huge, right?
yeah.
So
Hmm.
I want to invite everyone to really take to heart what she said. Get a pen, piece of paper, because I want you to connect with this woman because she has a podcast. I'm going to have her repeat that again, but I want her to say her website again slowly and her contact information so that you can find her. And I love the thing about kindness, right? I know that for me as an imago therapist, we talk about just creating a safe space and
Yeah,
also being curious about how did you learn about sex? For me, it
yeah.
was my father took me to this movie, JD Revenge. I don't know why he did that. But I was like, oh, they're having sex. Oh my God. We found this Playboy. And we'll ask the people, how did you learn about sex? And was it a shame? Think, oh my God, we found this Playboy and we had to put it back and then we got to take it out. How did you
Yes,
learn? And how did that show up in your own experiences? How were they treated? Was it like a don't tell my mother, we're
yes.
hiding stuff, or we being honest about it? So all those things influence us being as sexual beings. So now that I've said all that, ma'am, how can I get to your podcast? What is it called again?
So it is in the recording stages, so drop sometime within the next couple of months, but it is Sex and Color is my podcast. And so I will be talking with BIPOC experts on everything sexuality. And so I am very, very excited about this. Like this has been in the works for almost like a year or so now.
Love it.
So I am very excited that it's going to be dropping here pretty soon. So my website is Melanin Sex Therapy. And so I have like all of my information about when my podcast is dropping. And people can follow me on Instagram at Melanin Sex Therapy. And I'm on Facebook at Melanin Sex Therapy as well. So if anybody has any questions if you're in Dallas, if you need a sex therapist, if you're in the state of Texas and you want a sex therapist, reach out to me. Since I coach, I can do that from anywhere in the world. So
I love it. So
yeah,
there is no excuse for them not getting help.
exactly. Like
Awesome.
everybody deserves great sex, and like that have to have the type of sex life like they want and that their partners want and that they all agree on. So like it is my mission just to bring like healthy conversations and like put out more healthy functioning sexual people in the world.
I love it. Everyone, I love that. Everyone deserves great sex and everyone deserves intimacy and connection. And I think that is huge, which
Yeah.
is why I said you are my unicorn, right? You're
Oh,
the ambassador of Quan and sex. So, you know
not
how we
forget.
do. Please like and subscribe this. Pass this to other people on your social media. Let them hear this. It might save someone's life or transform someone's life. If you like to meet amazing clinicians just like her, I have a provider directory. It's a BIPOC provider directory called Color of Trauma and Healing, not the Color of Trauma and Healing.com. You'll find providers, but also on the directory, what I do is I feature on the back a 21 coping skills, 31 coping skills, so that if you're in distress, you can get this for free and it'll help you cope until you see your therapist or until you find a therapist. And on the front is the National Crisis Hotline. Order them for free. I mail them out. You can order for you, your organization, or your friends. But this has been amazing. So tune in next week. But, lady, thank you so much for being part of our
Thank you for
audience.
having
Here are your flowers. Here are your
me.
flowers. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.